aviation accident investigator, Steve Green. He is joining us here live on CP24. Thanks so much for joining us here. Obviously, this has happened just over the last couple of hours. We only had about 2.5 hours to process this. Seeing some of the footage that you've seen thus far, not the actual crash itself, what's going through your mind as a crash investigator?
It's, to begin with, the first thing, it's a all of that stuff, and it really paid off. I mean, it really shows. It's amazing to have the airplane in that condition and have really very few injuries.
So sorry, Mr. Green. We had a bit of a technical issue there. We lost your audio. Can you rephrase what you just said initially? I'm so sorry. You're going to get a lot of interviews, so it's kind of like a rehearsal here. Say, what was your initial reaction?
No, my initial reaction was just that I'm thinking about all of the effort that has gone into improving cabin safety and passenger safety structures, devices, the engineering that goes into that clearly has paid off. We've really made a lot of improvements in the last 20 or 30 years on cabin design. And when you look at the airplane upside down like that and consider how few injuries there were, that's really speaks volumes to the people who do all of that design work and certification work.
Yeah, what kind of improvements are you aware of that's happened? Because this is a 16-year-old plane, we understand. So what kind of, even before that, what kind of advancements have there been?
Just improving the structure of the cabin, considering the egress paths, making sure that the exits work, I can't speak specifically to the design criteria, but I know that we've done an awful lot of work in this, and I think we've seen it over the last few years. If you consider, for example, the Aviation crash a few years ago at San Francisco, I think we've seen a much improved survivability in these situations.
Yeah, and so, again, you mentioned how it's upside down. That was one of the first things I mentioned. I saw the landing gear up in the air. How does that physically happen?
That was my first thought was, oh my goodness, that must have been quite interesting. And I have no idea. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of factors involved. You do have some significant weather. The weather appears to be certainly within the confines of what the airplane can manage. It's not particularly abnormal. But I think there are going to be a number of factors that become involved. They'll be looking hard at things like wind shear. They may look at things like icing conditions. There's some blowing snow. There may be some visibility issues at the time of the landing. A lot of things involved, but to get into that situation, somehow there's going to have to be a pretty unusual touchdown, some kind of an attitude upset through the sequence.
From what we understand, it landed on runway 23. I don't know if that means anything to you, if you know the mapping of the runways at Pearson, but it gusts up to 35 knots. That translates to 65 kilometers an hour. Not hurricane force winds. Could wind have played a part here?
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the things that gets looked at, because that wind is more or less down the runway. Mm-hmm. So that's not particularly a crosswind. There's a little bit of a crosswind, but it's gusty. And one of the other factors is the wind that you're measuring at the surface may not be the wind that we're seeing aloft. That, within a couple of 100 feet of the ground, there may be quite a bit more wind.
And real quick, I don't know where you're situated, but obviously GTHA got a lot of snow in just a few amount of days. We've been speaking with Pearson, at people at Pearson, and they've been very diligent about de-icing and shoveling. They have melters on site, so there's no mounds of snow anywhere. How much of a factor could that have been, just the slickness of the tarmac itself?
It's a possibility, although I do think, they do a pretty good job of maintaining that runway. They would not have been accepting landings on it if they felt there was a concern about the condition of the surface. But as with everything else, all of these things are going to be factors that get looked at as the investigation unfolds.
And real quick, is there an operator error or something with the flight control, something happening in the tower?
I wouldn't even begin to speculate on that. We don't know anywhere near enough of what happened. And it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. But again, I think the thing we can really walk away from and say we're very thankful for is that we have so little injury in this case.
Absolutely, yeah. People disembarking the plane and actually bring out their phones and making videos, so they're healthy enough to do that. Okay, Steve Green, flight crash investigator. Thanks so much for chatting with us live on very short notice. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, Phil.
Of course.